All right, we will go ahead and get started. Welcome tonight. My name is Mark Rigger. I'm Executive Vice President of FGCU and the Director of the Office of Public Policy Events. And that is the group that is bringing you this event here tonight. So everybody that's involved with the OPPE, raise your hand. Thank you for helping to do this. All right, this is wonderful. But this is for you. This is for all of the students to come together around a topic of importance to you so that you can voice your opinion. So tonight is all about you participating in this, getting some food back there, and enjoying a good debate. So we'll have to, the ground rules, we want to maintain civility and civil discourse. Please don't talk over anyone that's making their point. Give them time to make that point, and then you can make yours. It looks like we have a fairly small group, so there'll be plenty of time for everybody. So that'll be wonderful here, okay? All right, so let me introduce James Fishbach. This gentleman right here is an extraordinary individual who we have as our moderator here tonight, and he will run the show, and I will sit down and shut up in just a minute or two here, Jim. But we're really in the presence of greatness here. He runs I guess a .org, a nonprofit, right, James, called Incubate Debate, and he works with Lawrence, and where's your other? Those two back there are running the show from the Incubate Debate team. They go around the state of Florida for the most part, and they work in high schools, and they teach debate skills and other types of discourse skills to high school students that go on to do wonderful things. And so we're really glad to have him here to be able to moderate the debate that's going to take place in just a second here. So thank you for coming and all the great work you do with the high school kids in Florida. That's important. So I will let you introduce our esteemed debaters over here. And so without further ado, James Fishbach, welcome.
Well, good evening. Before we hear from our distinguished speakers on both sides of the debate, let's talk about what a debate is. Got an important topic back here, but what is a debate? What is a debate? Trinity. Like an exploration of viewpoints. Folks agree with that? Exploration of viewpoints. For a debate to work, we don't just have to make our own arguments. We have to address the arguments of those who came before us, right? So if you're saying the sky is blue and the person saying the sky is green, but the person who's saying the sky is green is not trying to refute or to provide a counter argument to why the sky is blue, that's not a debate. A debate is the clash of those viewpoints, not just the presence of multiple viewpoints, but the clash of those viewpoints. And for debates to work, got to be respectful. We can all have our own opinions about this issue. It's a very contentious one, by the way. We should come into this, though, with the idea that good people can differ. Good people can have different perspectives on this issue, on who should be president come November, what we should do with the situation at the border, and still be decent people and have a respectful relationship. Let's just keep that in mind. Had an opportunity to spend some time here on your campus, talk with students, faculty, and staff. And it's an honor to be here, to tell you the truth. It's the first time we're doing something with college kids. This initiative was created by House Bill 931. Local Representative Spencer Roach here in the Florida House created this to require these debates to happen on campus because he wanted to see the clash of viewpoints and all of the magic that happens when people of different political persuasions from all walks of life come together. Before we hear from our distinguished opening speakers on both sides of this debate, let's just, if you've got pen and paper, let's write this question down because we're going to dissect it before we really get into the debate. It's important to frame the debate. What are we actually debating? Just define some key terms. So, social media. What do we mean by social media? What do we mean by that? What do we mean by social media?
I mean, it's a really big way to communicate with a lot of the generation, especially here at the school.
Yeah. So what's an example of a social media app?
Instagram.
Twitter. X.
Careful. Elon just lost $5 billion, which is 0.0 whatever percent. What other social media is there?
What other social medias? Facebook, Pinterest. Oh, I'm out of the options. I don't know. Oh, YouTube.
There's another one up there. It's gotten a lot of press recently, up there in the upper left.
TikTok.
Upper left of the slide, but also some would say on the left politically. Right? I think that was convenient for that to be there. We've got Facebook, we've got X, we've got all of them. All right, so that's what we mean by social media. We mean a place where people are posting. There's videos, there's photos, there's long-form text. Okay, cool. So we all agree what social media means. The important thing about a debate, by the way, is we need to know what we're debating. Because if you have a different definition of social media than John over there, guess what? We're not going to be able to have a debate. It's like, is soda good? Well, what kind of soda? What is soda? Is sparkling water soda? Is Coke soda? Pepsi's garbage, in my opinion, but that's not for the debate. Right? Okay, cool. So social media. Let's talk about the C word, censorship. That's a big one, by the way. What does censorship mean? Because if we got to get this puppy right if we're going to have an honest dialogue about it. Yeah, go ahead.
I would say censorship is to filter out a certain type of content.
Let's write that down for those who have notes out. Filter. And you know what? I like that a lot because filter is very objective. And certain types of content is very objective. When you say filter out hate speech, what is hate speech to Sally is not hate speech to Harry. Filter out disinformation. Big word. Probably see it on the SAT. But what the heck does disinformation mean? What does hate speech mean? So censorship, what's your name? Bree. Censorship is to filter out certain content. That'll be the heart of the debate is what is content and what type of content should be filtered. Okay, cool. So is social media censorship? Is the filtering of certain content on what sites? For $1 million, name one social media site. Pinterest. Facebook. Is the filtering of certain content on Instagram, Pinterest, Facebook, X, protecting or limiting? Pretty simple. What does it mean to protect a college student? We're not talking about physical safety, are we? Good. And what do you mean by that?
Certain types of content, when released, can lead to physical harm, such as the doxing of information like a personal address or a work environment in which later on people could possibly either attack physically an individual at those places or cause some other harm to them.
Correct. Very good. Do you agree with that? So protecting means perhaps this physical example in some edge cases. We'll talk about that. Your name? Connor. So Connor has a great point. What other types of protection are we talking about? Bree?
Another point would be like protect the mental well-being of students. There could be some positive content towards things that could be harmful.
Correct.
In regards to mental health content, pro-violence. I know school shootings are a big problem and things like that. So we could be having the wrong things promoted on social media or hacks, how to do them.
Exactly right. We're going to get into all of that in just a moment. Limiting. Before we hear from our distinguished opening speakers, Dr. Rieger. That's a portmanteau that was just rather fortuitous. It means people who speech. What do we mean by limiting? How could censorship, how could that limit you?
It might not allow you to do things like you want to do or like see the content that you may want to see.
It goes both ways, right? It doesn't just affect you as a reader or a taker in of information, but also as a speaker of information. There's a great quote from Frederick Douglass, which is, the First Amendment, censorship, is a double wrong. It hurts the person who's speaking, and and it hurts the person who would otherwise be listening. You speaking truth, you speaking your convictions about whatever it is, climate change, reproductive health care. If you're on the other side of that issue, abortion, pro-life, immigration, the economy, inflation, the migrant crisis, your ability to speak that conviction could be limited if censorship were the case. College students. That should be easy, right? All of you guys. And so let me just say before we hear from our opening speakers that I'm honored. This is not just an afternoon, evening activity. But I'm honored to be here at Florida Gulf Coast University to participate in a great American tradition. Every turning point in our history, the good, bad, and the ugly, has been preceded by the rigorous exchange of viewpoints, by open debate, by free expression, by men and women from all backgrounds speaking up, speaking truth, and trying to come to some semblance of where to go next. The decision to declare our independence was preceded by some rigorous debate. The decision to develop this little thing called the Constitution was preceded by some rigorous debate. The Civil Rights Act of 1964, some rigorous debate on the Senate floor there, and up till this present day. And so with that said, ladies and gentlemen, tonight we make history. This is our topic. Is social media censorship protecting or limiting college students? And it's now my pleasure to introduce our opening speaker with the view that it is actually protecting students, and that is Emory.
Good evening. So we all use social media a lot, sometimes hours every single week, and sometimes hours every single day even. And for something that we spend so much time on, it's very, very important that we pay a lot of attention to the kind of material that people are being exposed to. I'm here today to argue that censorship, when it is applied with great care to the context and the intention of the person that is making the post, benefits students. Now, before we dive in, I want to make something very clear. Censorship is a very dirty word here, and rightfully so. A big value in the United States is freedom of speech and the open transfer of ideas. Those are important values to me too. And when I advocate for censorship in this context, I'm not advocating for the silencing of views that the powerful find distasteful. I'm advocating instead for the common sense moderation of material that is harmful to marginalized communities in the form of hateful, homophobic, misogynistic, sexist hate speech that hurts individuals in the form of bullying, harassment, stalking, and that even kills people in the form of disinformation about things like health, politics, and the environment. It's a pretty widely known fact that people feel empowered behind the anonymity that the internet brings, and that can sometimes bring out the worst in people. It brings out the hatred, the anger, the rage. And when those things are focused towards people who have spent their whole lives experiencing discrimination and injustice, it can truly fundamentally change the way that they see themselves and the world around them. And even though it might be focused more in terms of its impact on those who are in marginalized communities, it's not exclusive to them. Anyone can be bullied, anyone can be harassed, anyone can be stalked. And when these things happen to people, it creates scars that can take years or even decades to heal, if they heal at all. We've seen some instances of people who have ended their own lives because of material that they saw online and the way that it made them feel about themselves and the world. And the tragedy is that that's not the only way that online material can kill. Disinformation, for example, the type that we saw during the height of COVID in regards to the vaccine and the different treatment options that people can have, has killed people. People have died simply because they were lied to, because they didn't have the information that could allow them to get the medical care that they deserved. And we can't bring those people back. But what we can do is make sure that that never happens again. And the way we do that is through the common sense moderation of this kind of material. And when we do that, when we silence all of this hateful and deceitful noise, we can create a space where students and the community in general can have open discourse, can talk about real ideas, real topics, have real conversations, real disagreements. And I think that that's exactly what we need to do. So thank you so much for coming. I'm very excited to be a part of this conversation.
Right off the bat, thoughts on Emery's speech. What do you agree with? What do you disagree with? Right off the bat. What do you think, Bree?
Harm people as far as mental health. I definitely have personal experience as well as have experience with my friends and peers having had damaged mental health from pro content on self-harm, anorexia, such things, bad things that shouldn't be on the internet that cause people to have really harmful reactions that could hurt them for a long time.
Thank you. Thank you for sharing that. Who agrees with that? There can be harmful content online that can hurt people. Is there anybody that disagrees with what Emery said? Yeah, go ahead.
Well, I do agree with a lot of his points. I want to put that out there.
Sure.
One of the things that I think should be distinguished is that this is protecting high school students, kids under the age of 18. Totally makes a lot of sense when they are growing, they're aging, still learning how to have confidence in themselves and different things. Something that I find interesting is that although I do always say we should promote mental health, that is extremely important, and that social media has such a heavy weight on mental health. A lot of times I feel like views like this can also put the responsibility on other people, trying to say that they need to be responsible for my mental health, when I think that there should be resources to promote mental health in a healthy way and not be relying on, well, these outside external sources should be, helping me with my mental health, when it's really an internal journey. And you're going to be exposed in a lot of different environments to unhealthy things, and we need to learn healthy coping mechanisms rather than expecting the environment to promote us to have healthy, environment.
Folks agree with that? Your name? Bianca, thank you. Let's talk a little bit about what Emery said, to disinformation. Talk about one specific policy, because we can talk about vague things, but one specific policy that YouTube had. After the 2020 election, President Donald J. Trump argued that the election was stolen. YouTube had a policy, and we saw his account get taken down on Facebook, his account get taken down on then Twitter, and YouTube, up until just a couple of weeks ago, had a policy that said that if you denied that Joseph Biden was the rightful winner of the 2020 election, in a video on YouTube, even if it was a 30-minute video about the cooking that you were doing with the snickerdoodles. Someone bet me to say snickerdoodle tonight. I had to get it in. I get $20. That even if you said in a video they stole that election from Trump, they took that video down. Even a video that Trump was in, an interview with the former president of the United States, that got 5 million views within 24 hours, was taken down. Good or a bad policy? Good or a bad policy?
I don't think it's a good policy, because whether or not you believe, this is someone's opinion. You shouldn't be able to limit that opinion, because what if you want to say Biden did win, okay, or Biden was the one who's supposed to win. Say Trump won, and we were agreeing on the opposite and switching their roles. It's really it's not their choice. It's they didn't win. Okay, they have another chance. Yeah. Essentially. So it's like a form of limiting that's not a good type of limiting. It's really like a give or take type of situation.
Right. And so an interesting approach you used there, which was to do what? To flip it. Let's say it wasn't Trump. Let's get the orange man out of the equation, right? Folks tend to get a little emotional one way or the other when he's involved. So let's just remove him from the equation and say Secretary Hillary Clinton in 2016 lost the election, and there was this information online that even she parroted, which was that Russia had interfered in our election. She said that you can be qualified, but the election can, quote, still be stolen from you. It wouldn't be fair to censor that content.
Well, this is what she believes. It could be right or wrong, whatever she is saying. But if this is what she wants to put out into the world, I guess it's whether or not we take it that way or not.
But what do we say? Do we agree with that? Kind of lukewarm? But what if you look at political violence and you say the lies told by politicians can contribute to violence? Anybody have an example of that? Yeah, go ahead. Connor? That's one way to think about it. Sit here in the middle, sit here in the mic, yeah. Weapons of mass destruction in Iraq. But what about violence closer to home? People say that, well, this video, this disinformation contributed to some sort of violence. Does that make it justified to then censor that or to limit that? What are you thinking about? You know what? Screw the mics. Just speak up. Because it's making it away. Mics away. Slowing us down. It's making it awkward. It's like being on a date passing sticky notes. Just going to speak up. Stand up. Good. Yeah. That was a very, very vivid per se. Vertically or horizontally on the chopping pieces? Just per se, though. Okay, so who can it?
It has to be like really like, oh, ooh, nice.
It's good when it's in time, yeah, I know.
Yeah, you can do it, but you have to be sort of like careful. You don't want to sort of like do it like in a knee-jerk reaction, I would say. Hopefully, like as long as like you have like a clear, concise idea, because like especially in politics, if you do something, no matter how you wanted to like no matter how you perceived it, other people might perceive it another way. So you have to be like really careful. I mean, that's all I can say. As long as it's not dangerous, it's all good.
Okay. Raise of hands, who agrees with him?
So
Just raise of hands of who agrees with him. Okay, so good, you got some hands there.
Yeah.
Now, yeah, go ahead,
Yeah,
sorry.
I definitely agree with him.
What's your name and what's his name?
Vincent?
oh, my bad. My name's Fabi, so
Fabi and Vincent. Okay, so Vincent,
Yeah.
you agree with Fabi a little bit.
I agree with Fabi, definitely. And I think where like the distinction has to be drawn in like stuff like satire.
Yeah.
Like there is a level of responsibility you have like to what you say, but there's also like a level of responsibility the other person has to like how they react to what you said. So that's especially like with satire. I think like satire on the internet is like very important, and being like that area where you can kind of criticize things in like such a like a wild way. You know what I mean?
Yeah.
Yeah, I think
So-
that's very important to have, especially when you were mentioning the stuff like the election. Although like anyone who mentions,
I don't think it was Trump was telling a joke.
yeah, Trump or Hillary, whoever they mentioned, and they got their videos taken down. Like I bet those videos were taken down even if they were satire or they were trying to criticize something. So that's like a really important point. It has to be like protected.
Yeah, pass that down. You got Bianca?
So this kind of relates back to the previous point that I brought up. Personal responsibility, I believe, is a very big thing that a lot of people miss. Everybody needs to take personal responsibility for every action and word that you say. I think that censorship sounds like a nice thing when we can say, oh, we'll just limit it to a few things, but it can be a very slippery slope. I personally come from, I'm Romanian, and my parents were born and raised in Romania during the communist regime. And they saw the entirety of censorship kind of play out in a government where it always usually starts off with a very small amount of censorship and saying that it's good for the good of the common people, we're going to limit it to this and this, but it oftentimes can be very subjective depending on who is placing those rules, limiting free speech, and then it eventually does progress to where certain ideas end up actually being promoted or cut down based on whatever people are setting those rules. And a lot of times when it comes to violence, of course, I'm not for any kind of violence against, depending on what other people are saying. But I think that personal responsibility, the solution would be that people need to take responsibility for their actions. So if there is something that is said in satire, or some kind of opinion that people don't agree with, the people that are committing those violent acts should be taking the responsibility, whether that means that there is arrests that are going to be made, whether it means that people need to be taking responsibility for whatever action and consequence they are taking. But that doesn't mean that our free speech should be limited just because people are being irresponsible.
Awesome. That's good. Okay. So Bianca brings up a great point. Do you agree, Vincent? Fabi, do you agree with Bianca's point? We get our steps in today.
Okay, sorry. So another little extra thing that I wanted to add too, that I sort of forgot, it's that, me particularly, I used to be in social media a lot, but then eventually I sort of like stepped out of it because of the amount of just crazy things that might be there.
Well, give us an example.
Right, so
Specificity.
Something I think that a lot of people can agree on is like, let's say Instagram. A lot of people in there, they try to act very, let's just say, have a lavish lifestyle when they're more than likely broke. Fake Gucci's, fake shoes, and then eventually like me particularly, got tired of that because then I was just constantly thinking about other people, and it's none of my business.
Are you advocating for the censorship of fake Gucci?
Honestly,
Can we get behind that?
Hey, frankly,
Can we agree on that? No fake luxury brands, okay.
Hey, you do you. If that makes you happy, go be it. As long as you're not harming anyone,
Yeah.
let it be. But it's that's one of those things where I've thought like, hey, I've also like sort of stepped away because even with those kinds of like tiny things, you will see like every day on social media people have opinions and they just throw it left and right, which is completely fair, mind you. It's just that even if you try to make a conversation too, someone might get so upset that they might try to block them. I don't know.
Correct.
Like spam them. It's like whatever you're saying is wrong. And then gets to a certain point where it's like you might want to censor it, which.
Yeah, it's a good point, Bobby. Let's remember that censorship is overall on the site. If you don't like some content, you're allowed to hit what? Block. Is that censorship? Yep. No. Well, no, because the word censorship means for it to be systemic in nature, right? If you block some Trump troll or some dark Brandon troll, both can be very annoying. You're not depriving someone else of viewing that. You're just depriving yourself of the agony of that. What do you think about this?
I just had a question.
Yeah.
So when we're talking about censorship, are we talking about the platforms imposing this, or the school, or like where is this coming
That's
from?
a great question. So the social media censorship We're talking about it in the context of the apps themselves. Talk about the YouTube policy, right? That says if you deny the results of the 2020 election, you're going to be taken down. Just a show of hands. Who agrees with that policy? If you deny the results of the 2020 election, your video gets taken down. Just show of hands. Okay, let's take us a step further. We're gonna. Oh, cool. You got one hand here. Why is that? Sorry.
No, I had a different question.
Okay.
I wasn't advocating for that. You would
Advocating for election denial. I would say.
yeah,
Okay.
yeah, or that you should censor somebody for election denial. You had mentioned that Hillary Clinton in 2016 denied the election, and she actually continued to deny the election. And she was never censored. There were never any policies placed against her.
Yeah.
But consequently, when Trump did it, it was placed against him. And I only mention that because when we asked for these censorships and policies to be put in place, we always have to consider who is the one making those decisions. And it can change from one hand to the other, or it can remain in the same hand, and that hand can then turn against you in the blink of an eye. And so we want to do what feels good, but we have to look at the broader and longer game.
Such a great point. Your name?
Kristen.
Kristen. Round of applause, please. That was a great point. We're going to hear from Tanner in just a moment. We're in a really, really good strain here. So what Kristen talks about is, okay, the censorship is the what? The video getting taken down because it violates the election denial policy. The Instagram post denying the vaccine is actually safe gets taken down. And Emery talked a little bit about what the effects might be of that vaccine hesitancy. We talk about the what, but who's the who? Who are the people who are actually hitting the button or designing these policies? Do we vote for them? No. Do you know their names? No. Could you pick them up in a lineup? No. There's some AI coming into this too. So that's the real question. What she's saying is absolutely right. And whether you're a fan of the Orange Man or not, his posts were taken down about election denialism. You can say it's different, but Hillary Clinton's post denying the results of the 2016 election, calling Donald Trump an illegitimate president, saying that Russia interfered, those posts were allowed to remain. So when you see that, what do you think?
Sorry, you caught me off guard there. Can you say it one more time?
Yeah, so Trump stuff gets taken down because he denies the election. Hillary denies the election, it's left up. What do you think in the context of what Kristen's saying? Who? Do you trust the who?
No, because if the same thing's gonna happen in two different fonts, you're gonna chop it in half on one side, but leave it alone on the other, then you're essentially just filtering it so that I see what you want me to see for your own gain, not for anything to do with me.
Okay. Agree? Very agree? Interesting point. Want to respond to that, Kristen?
Well, I agree.
Oh, you agree on it? Okay, cool. Here's the thing. Let's just take us a step further. I think most of us are in agreement that we don't want to take down election denialism. What about Holocaust denialism? Should you be allowed to deny the Holocaust on X? Should you be allowed to post a video on TikTok or on Snapchat denying that the Holocaust ever happened? Bree?
I think that while that is widely insensitive, that
Yes.
everyone is entitled to their own belief. If somebody wants to say that, it's like saying the earth is flat. Like, we have evidence that this happened, and any logical, reasonable person can, in our society, thankfully, retrieve this evidence for themselves.
Correct.
And that is a right that is amazing for us. So I think that if other people want to post this, while it is insensitive, it's not inherently harmful or dangerous, while we have access to information that can allow everyone to make their own educated opinions.
Okay, who agrees with her? We have a comment here in the back. Thank you, Bree. Your name?
I just had a question on whether or not, like, you know how X has a feature that shows that something is misinformation
Yeah.
and corrects it? Is that considered censorship?
That's a really good point. And so let's talk about that. Your name?
Ariana.
Ariana. Twitter 1.0, Twitter 2.0. Twitter 1.0 is called Twitter, 2.0 is called X. So Elon buys X, that's kind of, Elon buys Twitter, calls it X, that's the differentiating factor. In the first version of Twitter, that's the one people that kicked off Trump after January 6th, said that he was a danger to the country, couldn't use the platform. The people who pulled COVID misinformation, vaccine denialism off the platform. But what Twitter has now, what X has now, is that if you have a post up there that says the Holocaust didn't happen, or says that inflation was actually 0 last year, and it was 5%, as President Biden actually recently did, what people can do is they can do something called a community note. It doesn't prevent that message, it doesn't limit the spread of that message. But what it does is it takes what most people view to be a bad or a false idea and allows people to chime in and correct it. But it's not directed by a fixed group of people. It's directed by all of us. And so when you bring that up, Ariana, you're really talking about the public square. If someone stands up and says, I don't believe the Holocaust happened, what can we all do? Is it better for us to say, shut up and get out of here? Or is it better for us to say, no, it did. Let's walk you through the evidence, so on and so forth. Does that make sense? And do you agree with the former approach or the latter approach? Right. And so the idea there is the answer to bad speech, harmful speech, maybe even dangerous speech, for whatever that's worth, is not censorship, is not limiting that speech, but responding with what you perceive to be good speech.
I was just going to say that usually when people are told no or the opposite of what they believe in, they get super defensive. And so when they get super defensive, they tend to even believe in their point a lot more, and just even maybe out of spite not want to agree on your side. You could show this person all the evidence. You could even somehow maybe travel them back to that time and have them live it through. Unfortunately, hopefully, nobody actually does that because insensitive. But if they somehow went through this experience themselves, they could still possibly be, this is fake, you're lying to me, I do not believe you. Right. And it's it's a very sensitive situation where you have to be careful with who you're speaking to too, because it really depends on who you're speaking to as well.
That's a great point. That's a great point. That's a great point. Vincent?
Yeah, to add on to her point, you also don't want to make martyrs of people like that, because usually they like-minded people, they flock together. So you start taking one down, they're gonna be more invigorated, and it'll make things worse.
Yeah. And if you come up here and seriously, let's just hypothetically, some guy walks in and is like, Holocaust didn't happen. Can I come in? And our knee-jerk reaction would be, no, get out of here, bigot. Right? But maybe our reaction, let's just think about what we want to do with this for a second. Let's think about intention versus the mechanism. The intention would be to stop having him say the Holocaust didn't happen. Stop perpetuating that belief, which we know to be false and wrong and insensitive. But why is the knee-jerk reaction to kick him out and to censor him? Physically, it's happening in this room, but online, it's happening on X or on Facebook. So why is the reaction to kick him out? Shouldn't the reaction be, come on in, let's hear what you have to say, and then what would you do in response, Bree?
I think we could find, if there's anyone alive still, I think there probably are a handful of folks who could give personal testimonies, and in a couple years, when that's no longer the case, there's plenty of written testimonies, photographs.
Let's talk about it. Maybe we'll find some common ground somewhere.
Absolutely. Who agrees with that? We'll express agreement with claps. Hard for me to kickstart with the thing. Kristen, go ahead.
I know you had said that the two choices when something like that comes in is
Yeah.
to either tell them to go or to try to educate them. But why don't we just let them believe what they want to believe, regardless?
Sure.
If I know we have an objective truth, but people are allowed to have their subjective truth. And I think our need to impose our truth on others kind of happened with COVID. You've mentioned it a few times, and I've been accused of COVID disinformation because I didn't listen to the mainstream narrative, and I fought for my own facts, and I researched my own information. And there was a lot of things that ended up being mainstream narrative that everyone didn't question, that at the end of the day ended up being completely invalid, untrue, or having no basis in scientific reality, like the 6-foot distance and stuff. But if people online recognize, oh, this person is disagreeing with me, you don't have to engage. You can let them believe what they want to believe. You don't have to truth tell to them. Their truth is not your responsibility.
That's a great point. Round of applause, I think it's smart. And so that's a third option is, okay, you can come in, you can say the Holocaust didn't happen, you can say Trump won, lost, you could say Hillary won, lost, you could say insert controversial take on the transgender issue, whatever. We'll get to that next. We're getting closer to start dividing people in this. But what you're saying is absolutely right, Kristen. And who, does anybody disagree with what Kristen is saying, that if you believe Holocaust denialism, we could kick you out, we could speak to you, or you could just kind of let you be? Take issue with that? Connor? Anyone hear from everyone over here?
One of the main things we have to ask is why exactly do they believe that? In regards to Holocaust denialism, that's not really something in a vacuum per se. You don't just believe the Holocaust doesn't happen without also believing in some form of anti-Semitism, without some form of even white supremacism in some cases. It's sort of a fine like overlap between what might be fascistic ideas, like in regards to even not neo-Nazism and the like,
Sure.
as well with these ideas. Second thing, in regards to letting people be, it really depends on what exactly is dangerous. Like flat Earth is, compared to Holocaust denialism, the ideologies behind both aren't going to be as dangerous. When we're denying flat Earth, are we really doing anything in regards to pushing people away from a certain ideology that we are in regards to Holocaust denialism?
Yeah.
And it's a thing of like, even if we're not trying to convince the other person that it's wrong, what about the main audience?
Correct.
Are you even if you don't think you can convince the other person that they're wrong, you can at least argue so that others, the audience, can see it and say, okay, the Holocaust denialism is all bullshit, excuse my French.
Well, that was English.
And that's my point finished.
Great. Awesome. It was awesome. And let me just say to the people who say that flat Earth theory is not dangerous, be careful, you can sail off the edge. Okay, Ariana, we'd love to hear from you.
Oh, I was just gonna say I brought up the misinformation thing that's on X just because I like really believe in that. Like, so if people are like denying the Holocaust privately in their life and
Yeah.
it doesn't affect like public spaces online,
Sure.
then I agree, like they can be left alone because it's their private life. But if people are putting these ideas online that could have harmful effects, then I really do think like something should be done.
Sure.
And they shouldn't just be left alone. And so in that case, like the misinformation thing is important. It is a like tricky slope or slippery slope going down like the whole just kicking them off the platform. But I do think something should be done in those cases.
Okay. It's interesting. It's an interesting take. Yeah, go ahead, Kristen.
If somebody is denying the Holocaust, what harm is there in that? I mean, I know that people may have a feeling from it, and I don't deny the Holocaust. I know it may elicit a feeling from somebody or a group of people, but what direct harm does that have to those people?
We're seeing the direct harm of that right now, especially. I'm sorry, I'm over here.
Oh, I was like...
We're seeing especially with Gaza right now, like this
Yeah.
exact same cycle of misinformation and propaganda is being perpetuated again, and we're not learning from our mistakes. And that gets much, much worse if we deny those mistakes ever happened in the first place. Then we have no basis to go back on.
Okay. Response to that?
I'm not sure that the issues in Gaza are based on Holocaust denial, though.
I'm not saying that they are directly a response to Holocaust denialism. I'm saying that the Holocaust provides us with a framework for how a genocide can happen.
I think what you said actually kind of proves my point. You said it's not directly related. How many degrees of separation does there need to be from something I say to its effect before either there's censorship or I'm accountable now somehow?
I mean, genocide to genocide may be a different genocide, but I think the
Well, I'm saying
concepts
somebody
are
coming
directly
in and saying, I
comparable.
deny the Holocaust, and he's saying that. How does that contribute to Gaza? Or how did that start the issue in Gaza? Or how does that make it worse in any way?
Public opinion plays a very important role, especially when it comes to, if we're talking about America specifically, our government is funding a genocide, and our tax dollars are paying for that.
Yeah.
And as voters, we decide where our tax dollars go, or at least who picks where our tax dollars go. This public perception is everything. It's not just like a separate thing to what's actually happening in the world. It directly influences it.
Okay, so if I say something that should have a that affects public perception for a policy I don't like or an action I don't like, I should no longer be able to say that?
No, I'm not saying that.
Can I step in really quickly?
Yes, please.
Sorry. Okay. So while I'm not denying either side, it's just a matter of a snowball effect, really. It's like if a person came in here saying the Holocaust is fake, he can say all he wants. It's just the thing is how people take it, how some other people have said this, how people take it is really what it is, how it's like what's that's what it's important.
Yeah.
How people take things. And so, sorry. It's like I feel like with what they're saying is, correct me if I'm wrong, if we deny their denial or we're just ignoring it, letting it happen, it could just be history repeating itself with Gaza. If we don't have all the information, we don't know, unfortunately, what side to choose or what to believe in and what not to believe in.
I agree, and I can actually posit a great example on my side of the aisle for that. I had mentioned previously that one of the restrictions for COVID was a 6-foot distance. You know, Anthony Fauci has admitted that that's bogus, that there was just a number drawn from the air. It wasn't valid. People who died not just of COVID, but with COVID or during the time of COVID did not have the right to have their family members there with them in the hospital. Their family members were restricted from being there with them while they were breathing their last breath. That policy was put in place due to that 6-foot distancing. If that 6-foot distancing wasn't there, people could have been there with their loved ones while they died during the COVID time.
But what we did learn is that it needed to be at least a 25-foot distance.
No, they didn't.
No, because it's airborne. It was an airborne virus. It still is an airborne virus, and it can hang in the air for many hours. So it was really should have been much more than 6 feet.
There were no studies done based on COVID.
There is.
No.
I actually have colleagues that do research on aerosol transmission of diseases and viruses.
Okay.
And they have proven that even just the cold virus, that you get it from just walking.
I will take your word for it because you have more information than I do, but at the time, everyone was operating on this 6-foot barrier. And everyone had this assumption, and the policy snowballed, just like she said, and the effects snowballed, and what you ended up with was an entire group of individuals who died alone in hospital beds with no one there to comfort them, based off of wrong science. That should have been 25 feet maybe, but we didn't know that.
So I think the problem can arise in what we're kind of all agreeing with. Snowballing can kind of go both ways.
Yeah.
And with censorship, again, I'm always going to say it's a slippery slope. We've seen it in a lot of different occasions, whether it's through communism, whether it's through social media. So I'm a nurse. I work in the ICU. I actually worked during the COVID times. Not an easy time at all. And I think the perspective that I can bring to this conversation and relate it to censorship is that sometimes policies can be made because certain people view things in a certain way. We only have the research up until this point. Whatever the facts may be, whoever's making those decisions at the time, they create these policies based on what they think is correct at the time. But a lot of times, again, personal responsibility, I'm always going to bring that back up. With this 6-foot distance thing, regardless if it's 6 feet, regardless if it's 25 feet, they strictly made the policy where no matter what, nobody is going to be entering into these patients' rooms, regardless if that visitor has a care of, getting COVID or not, whether, they want to expose themselves to it or not. They limited the visitation. And yes, I have had a lot of patients. I have to sit there. I'm the last person that they see. I'm the last person they talk to. It is extremely difficult. I've been there. And so these policies sometimes can be very limiting. These policies can be very destructive. And again, I'm always going to say personal responsibility. If somebody wants to be exposed to that, I think that there should be certain measures that are taken. I mean, you can't go out and just start exposing everybody to it. But these people really just got to die alone because they were not able to, have anybody visit them in any capacity. So.
Yeah. So there's a real world implication here, right, Kristen? Now, to Tracy's point, you may disagree on COVID. Do you think her view should be censored online? Okay.
And I really didn't mean to get into this. I'm sorry. But I do agree. I think that bringing up your feelings and your experience in this time is really important. That we still need to think about the humanity and what these policies the effect it can have. And so I do think that everybody's voice should be provided. I'm a librarian, y'all. I run our library. I don't believe in any kind of censorship whatsoever. I believe in intellectual freedom. But I also know about disinformation, and I know there's such things as deep fakes. And if you're on the other end of that, I'm sure you want that censored. And I think you should have the right to be able to have that as well. So, but I agree. I think everybody's voice should be heard.
Okay. And so we've had an interesting conversation so far. I think Bianca's perspective as both a nurse and as someone who comes from a communist country and has actually seen the censorship. Talk about the Holocaust. What preceded the Holocaust was a period of censorship. Right? Was a period of censorship. And, the Iraq War, which many believe is a mistake, was a mistake now in hindsight. There wasn't literal censorship, but if you were a Muslim American speaking out saying Iraq was a mistake, the evidence that Colin Powell presented before the UN Security Council was misleading, you weren't literally censored, but you were ostracized, right? Remember, Hillary Clinton and George Bush were on the same side of that issue with the Iraq War. And so this censorship issue, it doesn't just penalize Republicans, doesn't just penalize Democrats, penalizes everybody, some would argue. I think everyone agrees the Holocaust happened. It's bad, needless to say. But let's take it a little further if we could, on an issue that we may not all agree on. And someone tweets X's, rather, that's the verb. Trans kids aren't real. Trans kids aren't real. Bree, first reaction.
I would say that person has the right to say that online. I don't think that we should remove their content from the internet, but I also think that the way that it is promoted to different users as far as the algorithm would be important to take into consideration. I think what happens a lot on social media is like, if you're engaging yourself with trans content on social media, say you're trans and you're looking up other people who are trans, social media tends to also show you anti-trans content. Right. So I do think that it would be important that the way that it's sent to users is important. I don't think that we should be inherently showing trans kids aren't real because they're looking up trans content.
Okay. So don't take it down. You disagree with the message, but don't take it down?
Yeah.
Does anyone disagree with the message and say we need to take it down, that we need to take down what some could view as that harmful content? Yeah.
I feel like we should be able to limit where it goes.
Okay, so slippery slope.
I know.
Because what did we define censorship as? Bree said it. What did you define it as? What verb did you use? And to limit the reach of it. And so censorship can run the gamut. It can be, you can't share this post. Hunter Biden story, by the way, New York Post, whatever you feel about the Biden presidency, that you could not share that story on X or on Facebook. It literally would not let you share that link. And then it also goes to the other side, which is, okay, you can share it, but I'm gonna turn down the knob a little bit. And turn down the knob a little bit on that. So where does that leave you? You're censoring her!
Can you repeat your question again? Sorry.
Well,
Okay, when you say limit, you're saying censorship. Everyone agree with that? We say limit, we're saying, we don't just mean take it down right now. Get that orange man off Twitter. No, we're not saying that. It can also be limiting the reach of it. And so to your point, Bree, as well, limiting the reach to trans kids is censorship. Okay, so what are your thoughts on that?
My thoughts on like reach, like
On the trans issue, limiting the reach of that.
I feel like how Bree said, trans kids shouldn't be seeing things, saying that they are not real, because it really depends. It affects these people, and I don't know if these people know what they're doing who are saying these types of stuff. Do these people, when they're saying these types of things, do these people know what their effect is? Because sometimes people are just saying things to say things because of whatever their beliefs are. They may not even have the entire information and are speaking on things they don't fully know about. And then they may not realize their effect on these people.
Okay.
And that could be really hurtful for both sides, not just one.
Okay, so it sounds like you would be in favor of limiting that content
Yes.
and in censorship. Okay, Bree? And then
So
go.
I just want to say, to be clear, I don't think that we should limit it as in that it would not be available to the person. However, I think algorithmically it would be important. Like, I think if a trans kid wants to Google transphobic content, that they have every right to do that, as much as it might be harmful. But it shouldn't be showing up unless there's some sort of an inclination that this person wants to see this content. And that goes beyond censorship and to the way the algorithms are built. I've seen a lot of information about like the harm of the way that the TikTok algorithm is built, which we don't have to get into, but just it has a lot more to do with algorithmically that. And I think part of the concern would be if we started to filter anti-trans content, that we might be blocking trans voices there, like by accident. Somehow it could be a slippery slope in the sense that if we're trying to remove anti-trans content and someone's trying to talk about their experience being trans, somehow that might end up being removed from the platform, and that would be more dangerous than not removing the anti-trans content.
Okay. Who agrees with that? Just raise your hand if you agree with what Bree said. Okay.
So would you guys agree that anytime that we have to log into or have an account on some social media, we have to provide an ID to prove that you are 18 years and older, and that way we can provide a difference between 18-year-old content versus not, because there's no real way to verify children versus adults. You can just say, fake any age. If we want to be in the real world and not have censorship, then anything kind of goes, and then you have to take personal responsibility. This person's statement seems really false. I'm going to look this up, research it on my own, because I have my own responsibility to do so. Children, obviously under the age of 18, are still learning those skills. They're still, learning how to do that. So of course, them being exposed to certain things can be hurtful, but then it either needs to be the purpose of the parents to help teach them or limit the social media exposure, or we need to have a way where we prove that you're an adult to be able to use this content so that people can post whatever they want, so people are not hurt.
Yeah.
Going off of that, kind of where this hinges on is the idea of let's say we're talking about adults here. The idea of censorship is essentially saying that you need to be protected from yourself, that you can't handle what you're looking at.
Yeah.
And you have adults, let's put it this way, adults at these companies telling you, other adults, what you can and can't see, and that to me is a little bit ridiculous.
Okay. Vincent?
Yeah, to further add to their point, I think it could be a serious consideration, just not to allow kids to have open access to the internet,
You can go to
and just save yourself the complication and just go absolute until they're 15, 16, and they're actually starting to develop who they are, and then they can actually make more reasonable choices behind what they listen and what they read.
It's a good point. Just take it a step further and prevent kids from having social media. It's something actually that's being debated right now in the Florida legislature. Connor?
Wouldn't that also be in some way censorship for a specific type of people? Because even with younger kids, for example, a lot of queer kids, usually if they are having like a bad home environment, whether it's like homophobic family, transphobic family, they find their community and like, you know, they're able to find community online through the internet, especially with like younger kids who may live in a community like maybe a more conservative religious community that is very homophobic, queerphobic, that kind of stuff.
What do you mean by queerphobic, transphobic?
When I mean that, I think it's mainly in regards to definitely hatefulness, where, especially in like some sects of conservative Christianity, where you are seen sort of as an abomination. They will quote, you know, Leviticus 18:22. You shall not like lay with a man as you lay with a woman. That is an abomination. And in that way, it's sort of with that kind of language, that kind of environment, there is very much a sort of hatred regarding queer people, like people who don't fit in the whole heterosexual, what we might call traditional idea of a relationship. And so,
should that content be taken down?
I feel like that's going a bit away from the previous topic, but I wouldn't. It's the same thing earlier with what you said about the transphobic content, where maybe you could have like specific changes in regards to where, like, should we have kids be recommending that kind of thing, where you're not limiting the content necessarily, you're just changing how it's delivered, like the recommendations, how we recommend things.
But the intention is pretty clear. It's to limit the spread of what you view to be bad content. And so we can dress it up in euphemism, right, Connor? But you're ultimately trying to prevent people from seeing that content, right?
In a way, yes, though I think you could also make it where people can choose to do it. People, for example, with X, formerly known as Twitter, I believe there were some settings in the old days of Twitter that still exist today where you can mute certain words. In a way, you're then putting censorship upon yourself.
And that's not censorship, though. I think, do we agree with that, that that's not censorship? If you're going out of your way and saying, look, I don't want to see the word trans, and to your point, Bree, that's gonna get rid of a lot of stuff, good or bad, in your own view. Thoughts? Okay. You're censoring yourself, so that's not censorship.
Okay. The algorithm as a whole, like, it applies to everyone. The way that the algorithm is going to choose your content, it's not just something that I'm saying, like, we should remove this from a specific person's page. It's more about the way that the algorithm is built to choose to promote certain things. It could be harmful in some ways that it's not inherently that. As well as, back to what you were saying, when I say trans kids, I don't necessarily mean people under the age of 18. And trans kids could be trans young adults. I'm not saying that we should filter this for a certain age. In fact, I did an extensive research paper on the effects of harassment and discrimination on transgender individuals' suicide rates in my high school. And we found that it's really important for trans kids to have a community that they feel accepted in as far as pronouns, their names. It makes an extreme effect on their lives, and some kids can find that on the internet, and it's very important for them to be able to access the internet, like, uncensored in that way.
Okay, interesting. Go ahead, Krista.
The only thing I have to say is when we talk about this, the goal is to not be harmful towards certain individuals, but even that is not clear cut, because the science on trans issues is not only is it not out, but it's hardly even debated in the open. So what we might find harmful for a person may actually not be harmful for them, or what everyone thinks is beneficial to them may be harmful to them. Us individually have no idea when the experts don't even know. So when we want to protect people, you have to, again, figure out who is saying how to protect them, and if it will even be effective.
That's right. And so, just a moment, Bianca, but I'm just going to address this trans kids aren't real thing. I got to tell you, for those who disagree with that statement, about half the country agrees with it. And let me just explain to you how they get there, okay, just to give you some perspective. Being transgender
is known as gender dysphoria. It's in the DSM-5. That's the American Psychiatric Association's journal, the manual. And what that means is that the sex that you're born into is not the gender that you identify with today. If you look at that DSM-5, what it'll say is things like, if a young boy does not stand to pee, pardon my French, but sits to pee, he is likely a trans girl. If a girl refuses to play with boys' toys, with girls' toys, like princesses, and instead plays with monster trucks, then she might actually be a boy. And so when we're talking about this trans kids aren't real thing, it's not settled science. In fact, countries in Scandinavia, Sweden, Finland, even the UK has now pulled back and said we're not going to prescribe puberty blockers to children. And so I think part of it, to your point, Kristen, is this is not a settled science. We're still having this debate. And the effects may be there to your research, Bree, but if someone says something that you don't agree with, what is the knee-jerk reaction, the rational thing to do?
When someone says,
something you don't agree with or you find distasteful or hurtful or harmful?
me personally, I would
Yeah.
just ask them, why do you think, how'd you get there? Why do you think that way? I want to see how you got there.
Yeah.
I want to see why we're disagreeing, because I know why I believe what I believe, and I know why I don't believe the opposite.
Yeah.
And I want to see if maybe somewhere along the way, their information got lost, or what they believe they probably got from a credible source,
Right.
or something like that.
It's a good point. And so that exchange of ideas, do we think that's good? To be able to exchange those ideas? The problem is if you censor that content, she'll never know what. You'll never know what somebody else thought.
Right.
And you won't be able to have that exchange of ideas.
I would say, considering the exchange of ideas, it's also important to consider, right now I recently saw that there's a bill that one state is considering banning, or I think it's actually Congress, they're considering banning AI porn after it happened to Taylor Swift on Twitter. And that would be an interesting form of censorship to discuss. Censoring AI, is that a type of free speech, or should we be censoring that AI that honestly brings even more into that's not even a person-to-person interaction, that's a computer-to-person interaction. So
Yeah.
is it that a valuable interaction? Is that a protected form of speech? That's just something I'd like to pose.
That's a great question. That's a great question.
So in a form of way of limiting would be maybe just adding trigger warnings. I know anytime I see a trigger warning or a content warning, I go, I don't care, just play the video or play the content. Because usually, for me personally, a lot of things, like I can get upset about things, but I'm not gonna actively go and tell this person I'm gonna get upset at things, because usually they're not gonna change their view just because what I'm saying. And it's not a conversation I feel that is worth my energy at the moment. You know, so maybe like adding trigger warnings for people who actually do, or content warnings for people for this type of content, because we don't want to limit, but we also don't, like, we want to limit, but not so much so that a person who wants to see this information can't see it.
So you want to limit it.
Essentially.
Censorship. Okay. It's okay. You can, right? But censorship. Let's go here. We haven't heard from you yet. And then we're going to go to Bianca.
Yeah, I'll just hop in real quick.
Sure.
I do think those trigger warnings are a form of censorship. And you could still watch the video clearly. Yeah.
Correct.
But because there's that big black screen and then you have to press that button
That's
to get to
limiting
the
it.
video,
Yeah.
well, it's censored. I also think censorship favors one side over the other. And so why can't we have all sorts of information, no matter what side it's coming from, and then we leave it up to whoever's using the social media to decide what is truth and what not is, what isn't true.
Yeah.
Why can't we have it all?
Yeah. Why can't we, exactly, why can't we have the open ideas to get to truth? right? Go again.
So I want to bring up a very interesting point. I think a lot of people forget the world is not catered to you, even though you think you are the center of your own world. But life is hard. Life is hard and things are unsettling, and you're going to be exposed to a lot once you start working. So I don't go to this university, my husband does, but I'm getting my master's in my FNP right now. So as a nurse, I've worked for about 5 years, and you have your own personal views, whatever you think about this world. And once you guys get into the work field, whatever it is you're going to be working, you're going to work with a lot of different people that bring in all kinds of different ideas that you may disagree with very strongly. The internet provides a very interesting platform because, again, there's that anonymity. But when you guys get into the work field, as a nurse, I have to deal with every type of person. I have to see them undressed. I have to deal with them, give them medications, all kinds of uncomfortable stuff. And they're also sharing their life stories and things I may not agree with. And so we think that just because it's an online, media thing and we don't have to physically interact, it's a lot easier to censor. But I think it prepares the young people to think that when they enter into real life, that things are going to be catered to how they feel. But in reality, you have to be understanding of everybody.
I don't mean to cut the conversation short, but it is 7:15 and we haven't even heard from the other person who was supposed to do the main speech about how censorship would be limiting college students.
That sounds like censorship limiting college students. We're going to have Tanner give closing remarks in just a moment. I know he's preparing away there to address some of these arguments. Yeah.
So to kind of argue against everyone else's point is instead of censoring people, why can't we as a society focus on practicing and teaching and learning from a sense of tolerance and compassion for others? I see a lot like everyone saying, well, we don't know if this is harmful for someone else. Well, you can kind of treat your brain and your mouth and your fingers kind of like gates, and you can ask yourself, is this helpful? Would I want to read this if it was about me? Would I want, if this was, I'm queer. So if I was reading something that was queerphobic or transphobic or something against, my life and my lifestyle, and someone said that, it would be great if we had the society that was receptive to tolerance and receptive to conversation to say, hey, well, why did you get there? Because you brought up the DSM-5, the 50% of Americans that don't believe that trans, they probably aren't reading the DSM-5. That's kind of a case in point. So I get why you bring that up, but that's almost also kind of a moot point. To me, at least, as someone who has studied psychology, I feel like a lot of those people are talking out of ignorance and not out of truth and not out of science. Of course, to each their own, and everyone's entitled to their opinions. And I don't think we should cater to each and every single person. I don't think we should be limiting ourselves or censoring ourselves. But we are also at a point in our society where we're seeing a lot of people who see one thing on the internet that triggers them, and then they're going into schools or they're going into hospitals or they're going into their workplaces and unfortunately committing terrible, heinous crimes. And we're mostly seeing that in America. There have been other cases, but it's not as rampant and as terrible as it is here in America. And I think it's really important that we start to look at what we're saying from a lens of compassion rather than aggression.
I totally get your point. Sorry to
No, you're fine.
to jump in. But the thing is, because we have lived so long with, unfortunately, not a very tolerable society, it is very hard to unlearn everything somebody has learned. Like, say an older person, usually it's typically, unfortunately, older generations who are saying these things. While I'm not saying younger generations aren't doing this, it is mainly older generations or the ones that have come before us that are saying these types of things, and it's a lot hard. It's really hard to unlearn things that you have learned from a young age or from multiple points of your life or from multiple different sources. I really do believe if we become a more compassionate and tolerable society, things can get better. But the thing is, we even though we're saying that we're teaching this way, we really aren't, and we're not showing this in the way that our generations are coming up. I think, like, sorry, really quickly, the younger generations, I think, are teaching themselves to be more open-minded and teaching others to be more open-minded, but because we're the younger generation, we don't have the credibility as the older generations, and so that's why no one's believing us or agreeing with us or giving us our voice and opinions to be truth.
Yeah. No, I totally see what you're saying. I'll share just like a little bit of like how I feel like it could be done a little bit more like effectively, I guess.
If I could just have
yeah.
you jump in, because I think you wanted to respond.
I have a little bit different point. Mike, continue.
We don't have a lot of time, so if you're going to make the...
One aspect of this debate is looking at it from the point of view of the social media company, whether or not they want to behave as a private company or versus a town square. If they would like to operate as a private company, then they would almost be incentivized to censor because they have a responsibility to their shareholders. They are a business after all.
Sure. And so we're not debating the legality of it or the financial motive behind it.
Yeah.
Simply whether it's protecting or limiting. Vincent, go ahead.
Yeah, those guidelines he's also talking about, I feel like our government kind of is sleeping on making like the specifics about it because it's so general that whenever it goes to the courts, like nothing really ends up happening because there's nothing like set in stone. There's no precedent on like what you're supposed to be doing online or what responsibility the businesses have and what responsibilities they don't. And that is like pretty important, like back to her point about like the Taylor Swift thing, when like deepfakes and that stuff, that's like when it starts getting better and better. So to get to the point where you might just be losing a job because someone like cropped you and sent it to like anywhere. And it's soon like social media just might cater to no one just because of that, because there's just going to be so much that you literally won't know what to believe.
Yeah. Yeah. Before I hand it over, Vincent, thank you for that. Before I hand it over to Tanner, who's been long censored, to give his closing remarks, let me say this. What a joy, what a pleasure it's been to participate in this conversation with you. You know, Incubate Debate, our motto is where students come not to compete against one another, but to compete with, learn from, and inspire one another. You guys had competing ideas. You learned from each other. I'd like to think you inspired one another in just being able to speak here with civility and respect. And so, yeah, we made history tonight because we, like the people who came before us, participated in this great American tradition of debate. But we also made history in the state of Florida, being the first debate here at Florida Gulf Coast University to be entirely student-run. The other debates, they're great. We had Cornel West and Dr. George earlier debating affirmative action, but it was two folks on the stage. You've had some debates where students go up there in teams and debate each other and the audience sits. It's a passive exercise, entertaining no doubt. But today's debate was made possible by each and every one of you showing up, speaking your convictions, listening to others, and I thank you so much for that. So give yourselves a round of applause. I'm now going to invite Tanner to give his closing statement on today's debate.
All right. Before I jump into my statement, I do want to say thank you to everybody for coming out. A big part of the Office of Public Policy events is being able to demonstrate civility in discourse and being able to interact with each other in a civil manner. And I think we exemplified that tonight. I was absolutely proud of all of you as my fellow students for being able to engage in these topics, because a lot of times when we discuss these things in the modern age, or as ironically as the conversation is on social media, it gets heated, it gets emotional, and you aren't able to have a productive, logical, and fulfilling conversation. And I think a lot of what I've heard tonight has been that productive, that logical, that fulfilling. I've heard a lot of common ground between sides of issues I never would have imagined hearing common ground on. And so I just want to say that I appreciate you all for that. We at the Office of Public Policy Events appreciate you all for that. And with that said, I'm going to jump into my closing statement, which is a really hybridized version of my opening statement. I will say you all made a lot of the similar points that I was going to make in my case, so that helped me confirm that I understood the issue. So just some of the things I'm going to run through. It's going to be a mix of what we've heard tonight and a mix of what I had prepared to talk about. And right at the end, I'm going to throw some things that I expected to come up and that may have been briefly mentioned, but we never delved into, because those are going to be some things that are some food for thought for you all. If you're thinking about this later, or if you happen to call your mom and tell her about the fact that you attended and many of you participated in a debate today, you can mention some of those things as well and just have that as kind of your finishing off. But the first thing I'm going to talk about today, and it's something that we kind of skirted around a lot, but we didn't get into, is that censorship is subjective. And so whenever there's censorship, there's going to be a censorer. And there is no guidelines, there's no legality, there's no determination of what information is being censored, what side of an issue is being censored. A lot of it's going to be up to what social power structures are in at the time. And in many senses, censorship works to keep those social power structures in perpetuity. And so that's something we're going to see with both, it creates an echo chamber. So when we get into social media, you may see, Twitter may be tilted one way, but then you get on Facebook and it's tilted another way. And people are going to start to pick the social media they like. I mean, I'm guilty of that. I haven't opened Twitter in 6 months because, it's weird now. And so, being able to understand that we get separated into these echo chambers and we get siloed out where we're stuck in being exposed to the same information and not challenging ourselves, it prevents us from having these conversations and being able to engage emotionally, or I guess unemotionally, into these topics and understand the common ground and the logic and as many of what James did tonight, the perspective that people are coming from with these issues. In addition to that, censorship can be polarizing. So if you're having one side of an issue censored, or if you're on a college campus and there's a common social media that's used, say most of the campus uses Instagram, but you feel like you can't comment for your political view or about global conflicts or about whatever it is, you're going to feel polarized. You're going to feel alienated, and you're going to feel as if you're not supported in those areas. And so having censorship does limit your ability to feel as if you belong, feel as if you're a part of the conversation, and feel as if you're a part of the discourse. Outside of that, digital literacy, that's one of the biggest things that all of us graduating college students are going to need while we're moving into the modern age and the digital age, and being able to discern what's misinformation, what might be missing context, and what is the hard and true facts. That's extremely crucial for us to be able to be successful adults in our modern society. I mean, not to mention the fact that we all, hopefully, are going to be voting at some point and expressing our opinions that way through the ballot box and stuff like that. Being able to discern what information is real and what information is missing context is crucial to that. We don't want to be, like my grandparents are, posting things on Facebook without checking on the context. We all know how to do that, but if we start censoring things, we expect that information to be just spoon-fed to us, and we start losing that ability to check up on that and confirm whether it's real or whether it's not. Lastly, just there's no real boundaries to this. So, a lot of you talked about slippery slopes tonight, and I think censorship could lead to a slippery slope. You may have it as, like he said, you can't talk about the election interference, but then what happens if that goes further and further and further, and all of a sudden you aren't allowed to talk about elections, you aren't allowed to talk about, and those are extreme examples, but where does it end? There is no real boundary, and like I mentioned when I was starting off, for every censorship, there's a censorer, and it's up to the discretion of what that censorer is doing when it comes down to it, and so that slippery slope is extremely important to pay attention to. Now, just some last things, some food for thought that I want to leave you all with. There's 3 terms that I expected to come up today that did not come up. The first 2 you have all 100% heard of. The first one is cancel culture. We did not talk about cancel culture much tonight, but that could be considered a form of censorship. And I think in our society it does act as a form of censorship. The other one is shadow banning. And so a lot of accounts on social media who are posting things that may be polarizing or contentious claim that they've been shadow banned and are arguing that the social media companies aren't pushing their posts out there as an effort to stifle them and stop them from being able to get their message out. And so those are things that I definitely expected to come up in the debate, and there's some things you can think about as you're leaving here. The last one, and if it was mentioned, I must have missed it or was mentioned very briefly, but is HB1, which is actually some current legislation in the state of Florida. And what that would do is it would actually ban social media for every individual under the age of 16. So it passed through the Florida House, and it's currently working through the Florida Senate. And what it would do is require all these social media companies to integrate an ID verification into their app. And then that way, if when you make an account, you have to put an ID verification, verify you're over the age of 16, or you cannot sign up for the app. And so it's a bipartisan bill. It's being worked on by both sides. There's definitely, depending on which side you view things from, there's definitely some nuance that you'll agree with and disagree with. But it's interesting, and it's something that, when we speak of censorship and stuff like that, this isn't the social media companies censoring. This is a government preventing us from being on social media and getting that voice out on social media. And so definitely something to look into, definitely some pieces to think about. And really, I do thank you all for coming out tonight, participating, and everything that comes along with that.
Okay. Well, thank you all for being here. I appreciate it. Take some of that food home. You all have friends and roommates and things like that. Please do not let that go to waste. James Fishbach, Tanner Kelly, and Emery Cavan, I really appreciate you coming out and opening and closing. This man is a national debate champion. Could you tell? Did it show a little bit? Yeah, a national debate champion from his past. And those two elected representatives that you have are two solid folks. So thank you for coming out and doing that. And if you had a good time tonight, tell your friends. All right, we have one more debate to do. We're planning it for, I don't know, March or April, right? That's how far we are, right? What we would like to do, and maybe Tanner, you just teed it up, we'd like to have a Democrat and a Republican, when the session is over, come here and talk about a bill, perhaps that they co-sponsor, and how they compromise to get something done for the people. Would that be interesting to you? If it's not, give us another idea, all right, because this is for you. But wouldn't it be interesting to actually see them sit down and try to work through and compromise and come up with something that's good for all of us? But we have some gifts. Miss Julie is going to present James, Tanner, and Emery. Some bling there. That's all we can do. We can't pay them. I mean, it's pretty much it. Take a sandwich, will you? Please take food. And thank you all for coming. We'll see you. Yes.
And we'd love to get a photo if we could up front, Dr. Rieger. Everybody?
All right. Photo,
Yeah.
anyone?
Photo up front would be great.
All right. Promise we won't censor you.